It shouldn't be a time of elation when a Manchester United manager is sacked, even if you don't think he's doing a particularly good job, and especially if that man was a club legend and a particularly decent human being. But this video isn't about so-called United fans who have a lot less class than our outgoing manager, or the lowlives on fan channels who make a living celebrating our club's lowest ebbs. This video is how we got to this point, why Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had to go for the good of the club. At the end of this 2021-22 season, we will be 9 years on from Fergie's last stand and our last league title. In that time we've had 4 permanent managers, and if you include Ole, 3 interim ones, as well as the current temporary manager Ralf Rangnick. And yet we still seem in some ways so far apart from that final glorious Fergie season, but also not a million miles away either. So what went wrong as to precipitate Ole's departure, especially since we acquired some stellar signings before the transfer window this summer? Whilst many Reds were bullish back in August, others still question whether it ever went right in the first place. Just for the record, this is not from the point of view of blinkered Ole in or Ole out fans. I was simply Ole win, but my and other Reds' personal desire to see this Old Trafford legend become a second coming of Sir Alex would not get in the way of reality. So was the Norwegian the right man in the first place? Let's start at the beginning. If you cast your mind back to late 2018, the club was in turmoil, struggling in the league, struggling for goals, struggling for form, and Jose was struggling in the dressing room. There may have been some method in his madness, but the public scolding of Luke Shaw on pretty much a weekly basis, and the regular Pogba outbursts amongst other cases of disharmony were reflected in his side's performances and some of the ugliest football that Old Trafford has ever witnessed. A 3-1 Anfield defeat being the final straw for his regime. The Portuguese's dismissal was a necessary one, but one where we thought in the aftermath, where do we go from here? I don't think there were many Reds who weren't in shock when Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was given several months' leave of absence from his current club Molde to take the reins at Old Trafford till the end of the season. Even for the short term, that seemed like a strange move. Chelsea used to get Gus Hiddink in with a slew of credentials. We got someone with far fewer. That said, Solskjaer knew the United culture, was a winner, at least as a player and even as a coach at Old Trafford, did guide the reserve side to become champions. But that's very different to moulding the first team bereft of confidence and direction. But something very strange happened. Not only did we start winning as soon as he took over, we started playing well. Very well. Fergie era well. That's no hyperbole. Unbeaten in his first 15 matches, the football was terrific. And when we got ourselves into trouble, we tended to get ourselves back out of it, with late equalisers or winners. Very Ferguson-esque. Pogba, one of the main banes of Jose's tenure and who'd scored just 3 league goals all season, suddenly had 4 in Solskjaer's first 3 matches in charge. The fans as one were singing Ole's at the wheel, with gusto, and few saw the writing on the wall for last November's final verse. Cup wins at the Emirates and Stamford Bridge complemented a league run that took us from 6th to 4th in the Premier League. Even when we did fail, as we did when we were outplayed at home to PSG in the Champions League knockout stage, we somehow managed to eke out a last-gasp 3-1 win in the French capital to progress. By the 28th of March 2019, when Ole signed a new contract to become permanent manager, our only defeats were 1 league match, that Champions League first leg to PSG, and we were out of the FA Cup thanks to Wolves. But before the ink was dry, our form then seemingly all changed back overnight. I'm not sure what Ole was doing for those first 18 games, but the way the side changed, there was still something seemingly very rotten in the dressing room from Mourinho's reign. We won just 2 of our final 8 league games, resulting in defeats like a 4-0 drubbing at Everton, a derby defeat at home, a draw at relegated Huddersfield, and in some ways the most telling, a shocking 2-0 home defeat to Swansea on the last day of the season at Old Trafford, the club who we'd tonked 5-1 at their place in the new boss's first game. And this is all on top of 2 poor Champions League defeats to Barcelona in the quarter-finals. So was this another bit of bad business by Woodward? Was Ole out of his depth from the start? And was the dressing room already going to be his downfall, as they seemed to be by the time he was put out of his misery in November just gone? Despite his departure and the more than a year-long Ole out movement on social media, which was never really replicated on match day, there were some significant positives to the Norwegian's reign. Since the managerial goat had left, we'd been treated to some of the worst football that I've ever seen, which remarkably took place under 2 managers known for building not only successful but exciting sides, namely Louis van Gaal and Jose Mourinho. However, their football at United was generally turgid, unattractive, negative and dour much of the time. Under Jose, we went the whole season without scoring 5 in a game, for the first time in decades. And their predecessor, David Moyes, tried to play attractive football, but having lost the dressing room almost from the beginning, to the senior and more youthful players alike, the results never followed, as he vainly tried to entertain the Old Trafford faithful. As mentioned earlier, with Ole it was different. A lot of the games early on were true old-school United football. playing the United way, and even last season I don't remember us scoring 5 or more goals in as many games as we did. Even in this campaign we started with a 5-1 victory over Leeds and a couple of games later 4-1 against the Geordies. Another positive was the dressing room, or at least it was up to this term. As mentioned earlier, the dressing room mentality fell through the floor from the start with Moyes and continued with his successors up to Ole. It wasn't all plain sailing, but Solskjaer's genuine good guy persona and lack of a heavy hand seemed to do wonders for the squad, encouraging a more relaxed atmosphere, allowing players like Luke Shaw, verbally battered and berated under Jose, to flourish. That, combined with an ever-growing number of good performances, an improved position for the club in the league, ensuring Champions League qualification, seemed to change things around a lot. The Norwegian appeared to sustain stability on something that his more experienced predecessors couldn't handle, but his approach would also contribute to his final undoing. Moving on, the United legend come manager also saw some decent transfer business, getting rid of the ill-fitting Marouane Fellaini, the anonymous Matteo Darmian, a tiring Ashley Young, a seemingly declining Chris Smalling, a festering Alexis Sanchez, and a rotund Romelu Lukaku, breaking up what seemed to be less than a healthy friendship with the ever-troublesome Paul Pogba. This was on top of bringing automatic cult heroes and/or elite players like Bruno Fernandes, Edison Cavani, Jadon Sancho, Rafael Varane, Donny van de Beek, and of course the return of Cristiano Ronaldo. The problem with all of these successes in his tenure were that the negatives, the lows, the minuses, whatever you want to call them, always seemed to outshine them, or outdarken them. Just popping back quickly to his transfer policy and man management, our recently departed boss didn't seem to know how to be ruthless either. He gave new contracts to Jesse Lingard, Andreas Pereira, Eric Bailly, Anthony Martial, Phil Jones and many other non-deserving Reds, loaning them out when necessary or giving them more money to keep them happy instead of just getting rid. It was as if he didn't want to upset anyone. The signing of Donny van de Beek was the most curious and frustrating of the lot. The Norwegians' treatment of him, giving next to no playing time to this Ajax starlet, while stubbornly starting at Fred or an undeserving Pogba, confused most of the Old Trafford faithful. We'd beaten off some quality European sides for his signature, and it was clear from his first appearance that he was gifted with a great touch, and we wanted to see more. This ugly matter where the Dutchman would get 5 minutes at the end of games plus injury time, he showed himself to be the consummate professional, which stirred up an ever-growing section of what was already a polarising set of fans against the manager from last season onwards. My best guess was that Donny was thrust upon him by Woodward et al, and it was the former boss's best attempt at being a tough guy, but all it did was to show certain sections of disgruntled fans as well as other fair-minded ones that he wasn't capable of managing a club of this stature. Imagine how different he would have fared had he treated Pogba like this instead. For the Frenchman's social media outbursts and dissatisfaction, his poor disinterested performances and his special agent's toxicity. The purchasing of Dan James was a strange one too. A speedy winger brimming over with passion but not matched by the necessary talent. And it actually shocked me that he made a tough but correct managerial decision and shipped him off to Leeds before the summer transfer window ended. Another perplexing point of fact was the addition of more and more goalkeepers, including 2 that could potentially be number 1s for the club, namely Dean Henderson and of course David De Gea. At one stage we had 5 keepers on the books, and yet he still gave Lee Grant an extension. He must have made a solid impression holding up that subs board that one time. If you're to the name Sergio Romero, you have a bit of the Donny situation and a bit of this keeper situation. Essentially poor housekeeping and man management. In all seriousness, we were shelling out in excess of £500,000 on goalkeeper wages each week. In fact, we still are. No club needs or can easily manoeuvre 2 quality keepers at one time. Henderson was given a salary increase under Ole to £100,000 a week. I thought that would signal the Spaniard moving on and us cashing in, but no. He alternated them in league games, not just cup matches, just like my old gym teacher used to do at school because he didn't want to upset the clearly inferior understudy, and it was the only fair thing to do. Another thing levelled at Ole Gunnar Solskjaer as United boss was that he didn't even know his best formation or team, or at the very least played the wrong tactics against the wrong opposition, crucially against direct peers for Champions League spots or silverware. A number of semi-final failures, disappointingly against our city rivals, saw one final in 3 years against a mediocre Villarreal side who'd never won a trophy in their history before and were a massive 28 points off La Liga champions Atletico back in 7th last year. Yet, we were made to look ordinary in the Champions League final by the Yellow Submarine. Opposite number Unai Emery, despite having inferior players to work with, had drilled his side expertly, made his substitutions with calculated efficiency. You can call the 11-10 penalty shootout defeat a farce, or simply bad luck, but in normal time, Ole didn't even trust his squad to make the plethora of changes to fight the inevitable fatigue for the starting 11, only making his first one with Fred coming on in the 100th minute. the rest from the 116th. Hardly inspiring management. To be fair to Ole, the fans who wanted his head wouldn't have been appeased by a second-tier European win after we'd been dumped out in the group stage of the Champions League, needing only realistically one win from our last 3 matches, but instead losing all of them. In defiance of the malcontents, a number of whom actively wanted United to lose every game under him until he was fired, a win in that tournament could have galvanised the squad for this season, and perhaps we'd have had better results in the opening dozen league games or so. But we'll never know. That European final mess had been coming, with the loss of Maguire at Villa with a handful of games to go, as he'd been marshalling the defence brilliantly at the back end of last season up to that point. The big home defeats to Liverpool and then Leicester really showed what a shell of a team we were without him and how confidence was lacking. And talking of Liverpool, a prime example of Ole getting tactics wrong was a trip to Anfield as league leaders in the January. The Scousers were down to their second set of midfielders to be played at centre-back due to their hilarious injury situation, but Ole for some reason let them off the hook. An empty Juanfield against a side of walking wounded when we, the team and fans, were on a massive high due to finally being top at New Year for the first time since Sir Alex left us, almost 8 years before. We didn't go for them and let them get away with a goalless draw while City just kept winning and winning to easily overhaul us and take the title. It was that lack of teeth or ruthlessness which showed how lacking he was with certain facets that embody a successful manager. I really can't think of any bosses who don't or didn't have a ruthless side to make themselves successful, especially at United. To me, Ole seemed to be clearly too nice for the job, and the fact that his squad, to a man, called him that. Ole. Not the boss, the gaffer, the manager, etc. No, just Ole. Everyone's smiling friend. This was reflected in the low work rate that was constantly brought up this season by pundits. The players took advantage of his good nature and did the bare minimum, because they knew he wouldn't change things. Some of the defending by Shaw, touted as the best left-back in Europe months before, was amateurish and lazy against City, and he was just plain unprofessional. And I'm not going to go all Jose and start picking on him. The vast majority of the players let Solskjaer down this term, including the skipper, but the boss let himself down by accepting this and picking these wastes of carbon week in, week out, whilst there are other players who deserve their chance, even by default, who were overlooked. That's poor management. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was never going to be the man who would lambast the best United player on the pitch when the side is winning at half-time in order to get a bigger performance from the dressing room in the second half, because he smelt some complacency, just as Sir Alex famously did with Patrice Evra. It's unfair to compare the Norwegian and the Scot, but the former spent in excess of a decade listening and learning from the latter. They valued one another, yet that appears to be no qualification for success or being a competent manager, never mind a world-class one. Personality is such a key attribute. The Scandinavian was too soft. I just hope he has learnt from this for his future roles. Solskjaer rode his luck on more than a handful of occasions. In his first full season, the dressing room still hadn't come to terms with his appointment, and we'd had a torrid start. It looked like in February 2020 that was going to be it for him, but the inspired signings of Bruno and to a lesser extent Igalo contributed to a huge dressing room uplift and belief. Even Pogba wasn't miserable for a while. We went on a run akin to title form, but we were far too far behind in the first place and just managed to scrape third on the last day, with arguably much of that due to the initial COVID upheaval and playing the end of the season in 2 parts. We handled that better than most. The second time he was in danger of losing his job was around autumn last year, when again results were poor. Home defeats to Palace, Arsenal and 6-1 to Spurs, as well as going out of the Champions League cheaply, along with the fact that Pochettino was pitched in the press and demanded by a solid tranche of United fans to replace the Norwegian via social media. It looked like the boss's days were numbered. But every time the axe was about to fall, he would win. And then he went on an epic run with 10 wins and 3 draws till the end of January. And with our other peers foundering apart from City, he earned a comfortable, if not fortunate, runners-up spot. However, the Ole out brigade were not convinced, especially with the aforementioned Europa League final loss. And now on to this campaign, and hopes were high. Check out my preview of the season with the link in the description. I pointed out how we needed to win pretty much all our opening games for this massive run of hard fixtures we'd have to encounter in the autumn. Maybe Gary Neville wasn't convinced that we'd win the league, but the number of times I read #21 or words to that effect after the trouncing of Leeds on the opening day, and before it to be fair, seemed to suggest that he was in the minority of United supporters. We'd come second the year before, albeit a tad fortuitously, but we and the boss got 2 pieces of good news. 1, Woodward was on his way, and 2, the manager would be back to the hilt in the transfer market. After finally securing Sancho after an epic transfer saga, the elite centre-back Rafael Varane, who we'd all knew we desperately needed, and then to get Ronaldo back, It was like a dream come true, especially as he'd snubbed City to come home. Was it the perfect transfer window for us? Well, not quite, but it was pretty damn close to be fair. Ole finally had the makings of a squad, but then, as it seemed all summer that he'd go, he kept Lingard on. Hasn't really played him since. And just as Juan Mata was deservedly and supposedly going to be made into a club ambassador, there was a U-turn, and he was back on the club's playing roster for the season. I just don't get it. Lingard perhaps, as he did so well at West Ham on loan last term, but Mata, who never plays unless it's a dead rubber in Europe or an early league cup match. Why? Further, and I'm sorry to harp on about it, he blocked a loan move for Van der Beek to Everton with promises of more game time, which when the season started evaporated as quickly as United's good performances. We all think he's a really nice guy, and he seems to be. The evidence is there, but that was bordering on malicious. Who knows what happened though? Was Ronaldo, for all the benefits of his return to Old Trafford, a distraction? Was the great man thrust upon Ole, disrupting his plans for how he wanted to play for the coming season? Maybe we'll never know. What we do know is that for all the good wins at the beginning of the campaign against Newcastle, West Ham away, and even the terrific Leeds win, unless you were blinkered, there was something wrong. And especially for those first two games mentioned, more than a bit of luck to get into that position. And add to that the two matches versus Atalanta and Villarreal in the Champions League group stage, and it didn't take a genius to understand there was something ominous about the Norwegian's tenure as manager. Then thereafter, with that run of very poor league results, first against Villa, then Everton, Leicester, and then the worst performance I can remember seeing in my 35 plus years as a Red, the 5-0 humiliation against the Scousers, it was a shock that the boss wasn't sacked there and then. We looked disjointed, clueless, and even fortunate to get away with 5. It could have been so much worse. Incredibly, it appeared that the great Scot, Sir Alex, had somehow wangled him an extension of at least 3 matches, of which he convincingly lost the derby again at home, but the 4-1 defeat at relegation hopefuls Watford was the final straw. You can argue by this time that the players had given up on him, with ironically only Van der Beek drawing any sort of praise in that final game, as he came on as sub, putting the effort in, whilst the side that Ole constantly chose week in week out abandoned him, as they'd done for several games before. A lot of blame was heaped on the ineffectual backroom staff, including Mike Phelan, Michael Carrick and Kieran McKenna, who didn't push the players and work them hard, and/or were insufficient counsel for the boss's lacklustre and ineffective tactics. Their installation at the club seems to also be a tremendous fail for him. This season reminded me of my first couple of years as a Red, and Big Ron's departure in some way. The seasons before both were sacked, they seemed to have reached their respective peaks but then blew it. Ron in 85-86 letting slip a 10-point First Division lead, and Ole, with his vain push for the title then losing the European final. That was his zenith. It's as if both squads lost faith in their respective United bosses. It could have easily happened to Fergie in 1990 had we lost the cup final to Palace. History turns on such events. It's all well and good to be an Ole in and support the managers to the very end, and believe me, even against Watford, I only wanted us to win. But sometimes the best thing for the club is to remove the manager if it's not working. Not as a knee-jerk reaction, but as a reflection of his performance over the last 3 years or so, where whilst there's been positives for sure, some great memories, brilliant signings and fixing of things that needed to be sorted out, like the dressing room, it was clear that the Norwegian was tactically naive, not ruthless at all, and just everyone's friend, not the boss. He was Ole. He picked the team every week. Moving on, it's already starting to look like Ralf Rangnick has more vision, ruthlessness, tactical awareness, presence, and that no-nonsense, uncompromising German point of view. He's focused. Ralf Rangnick's only supposed to be here for 6 months or so as a temporary manager, and there've already been hits and misses, but it'll take him a bit longer to whip this lazy, lacklustre squad into shape. So what did you make of Ole's reign, what he achieved, and did you believe at any point he was the right man for the job? And as for my analysis of how it unravelled, do you agree, or did I miss something out? Or was I way off target with some of my assessments? Let me know in the comments below. Also, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you for your support.